Please, somebody. I can't get my legs free. The water's coming in, Haley. Maddox's voice cracked through the shattered window of her overturned SUV. Thin and desperate, swallowed almost instantly by the roar of the storm. 20 feet away, a stranger stood frozen at the edge of the flooded highway, staring at the fuel leaking beneath her car, and made a decision that would change everything. "I'm coming," Caleb Dawson said. "Just hold on. If you're new to this channel, welcome, and if you've been here before, welcome back. Hit that subscribe button before we go any further, because this story is going to take you somewhere you won't forget. And I want you with me all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I love seeing just how far these stories travel. Now, let's get into it. The rain hadn't let up in over an hour, and the highway outside Flagstaff had turned into something closer to a river than a road. Caleb Dawson sat behind the wheel of his pickup truck, engine off, headlights cutting weak yellow cones through sheets of water, waiting for the worst of the storm to pass before he risked driving any farther. He'd pulled onto the shoulder 20 minutes earlier, not because he wanted to, but because visibility had dropped to almost nothing, and the last thing he needed was to put a dent in the only thing he owned that still ran. He heard the SUV before he saw it, tires shrieking against wet asphalt, then a sound like the world folding in on itself, metal grinding, glass exploding outward, a heavy, sickening thud that vibrated through his own chest, even from a distance. He was out of the truck before he'd finished processing what had happened, boots hitting standing water, rain needling into his eyes. The SUV had flipped twice and come to rest upside down in the median, one wheel still spinning uselessly in the air. Steam hissed up from beneath the crumpled hood, and underneath that steam, curling in thin gray ribbons that no one but a mechanic would recognize for what it really was, came the unmistakable smell of gasoline. Caleb's stomach dropped. Other cars were slowing now, red brake lights smearing across the wet pavement, a few pulling onto the shoulder behind him. Doors opened. People stepped out, phones already raised, screens glowing in the gray afternoon light. "Oh my God, is anyone hurt in there? Someone call 911. Don't get too close. Man, that thing could go up." A middle-aged man in a rain jacket lowered his phone just long enough to shout, Hey, don't go near it. The tank's ruptured. You smell that? That thing's gonna blow." Caleb didn't stop walking. "Sir, I'm serious. Step back." The man grabbed for Caleb's arm, missed, then gave up as Caleb shrugged him off without even breaking stride. "You're gonna get yourself killed for nothing. The fire department's 5 minutes out." 5 minutes is too long," Caleb said, not turning around. He dropped to his knees beside the wreck. Through the shattered rear window, upside down in a nest of collapsed airbags and scattered glass, he saw her, a young woman, blonde hair matted with blood, one arm pinned beneath the crushed dashboard, eyes fluttering open and closed, like she was fighting to stay conscious and losing. "Hey," Caleb said, voice suddenly steady in a way that surprised even him. "Hey, look at me. Can you hear me?" Her eyes found his. "It hurts," she whispered. "My leg, I think. I can't move it." "What's your name?" "Haley." A sob caught in her throat. Please don't leave me here. I'm not going anywhere." Behind him, more voices rose from the growing crowd on the shoulder, a woman crying into her phone, a teenager filming with shaking hands, a trucker pacing back and forth shouting for anyone, to do something, while doing nothing himself. Caleb heard all of it and none of it. His whole world had narrowed down to the space between himself and the girl, trapped 6 inches away from a fuel line that was slowly, steadily leaking gasoline onto scorching hot metal. "I need something to break this glass," he called over his shoulder. "A jack, a wrench, anything." Nobody moved. "Come on." Caleb's voice cracked with fury he didn't know he had in him. "Somebody hand me something." A young man near the back of the crowd, phone still filming, called out, "Bro, just wait for the fireman. It's not worth it." Caleb didn't answer. He didn't have time to answer. He looked down at his own hand, curled it into the tightest fist he could manage, and drove it through the already fractured rear window. Glass bit into his knuckles, opened a gash across his forearm. But the window gave way in a shower of safety glass that rained down over both of them. Haley, listen to me. He reached through the opening, past twisted metal that scraped against his shoulder, and got his hand around her wrist. Her pulse fluttered weak and fast beneath his fingers. I'm going to get your arm free, and it's going to hurt, but I need you to stay with me. Can you do that? I'm scared, she breathed. I know. Me too. Do it anyway. Something in his voice must have reached her, because she nodded, jaw tight, tears cutting clean tracks through the blood on her face. Caleb braced himself against the crumpled door frame and pulled at the section of dashboard, pinning her arm. It didn't move. He pulled harder, felt something tear in his shoulder, ignored it, pulled again, and this time the metal groaned, shifted an inch, then two. That was when the flames started. Not an explosion. Not yet. Just a low orange flicker licking up from beneath the engine block, catching on spilled fuel, spreading fast across wet asphalt in a way that should have been impossible in the middle of a rainstorm, and wasn't, because gasoline doesn't care about rain. Someone in the crowd screamed, "It's on fire! It's on fire! Get back! Get back, Haley!" Caleb's voice tore out of him. "Your arm right now. I need it right now," she screamed, a raw, animal sound of pain as the last few inches of trapped metal scraped free of her arm. Caleb didn't give himself time to feel relief. He got both hands under her shoulders, dragged her through the shattered window frame, glass and jagged metal tearing at both of them, and hauled her clear, just as the flames reached the fuel line and the whole underside of the SUV lit up in a wall of orange heat that Caleb felt on the back of his neck like a slap. He didn't stop moving. Couldn't. He got one arm under her knees, the other around her back, and half ran, half stumbled through ankle-deep water toward the shoulder, away from the wreck, away from the heat that kept climbing behind them. "Somebody help me." His voice was raw now, stripped down to something almost animalistic. "She needs a hospital, now." The crowd that had filmed the whole thing finally moved, not to help carry her, not at first, but to clear a path, phones still raised, capturing every second of it. Caleb laid Haley down on the wet grass at the edge of the shoulder, stripped off his own soaked jacket, and pressed it against the gash on her forehead. "Stay with me," he said. "Sirens are coming. You hear them? That's for you. Stay with me." Haley's eyes were losing focus, rolling back, her breathing shallow and fast. Caleb gripped her hand hard enough that his knuckles, already bleeding, went white. "Haley, Haley, look at me." Her lips moved. At first, no sound came out. Caleb leaned closer, ear almost against her mouth, rain running down the back of his neck. "Call my father," she whispered, each word costing her something. "His name, Ryland Maddox. Please tell him I will. I promise you I will. Just stay awake." Her eyes closed. "Haley." Caleb's hand went to her throat, found a pulse, weak but there. Hey, somebody get over here." "She's losing consciousness." The paramedics arrived 90 seconds later, though it felt to Caleb like 90 years. They swarmed around Haley with the brisk, practiced calm of people who did this every day. And for one disorienting moment, Caleb found himself pushed backward, out of the space he'd occupied for the last several minutes. Suddenly, just another bystander in a crowd of bystanders. "Sir, are you hurt?" A paramedic, young, efficient, badge-reading Garza turned to him, taking in the blood on his arms. The burn already blistering along his forearm where he'd been too close to the flames. "I'm fine. Take care of her." "Sir, that burn needs attention." "I said I'm fine." Caleb's voice came out sharper than he intended. He softened it. "Please, just make sure she's okay." Garza studied him for a second longer, then nodded and turned back to Haley, calling out vitals to her partner. Caleb stood in the rain, arms wrapped around himself, and watched them lift Haley onto a gurney, an oxygen mask fitted over her face, an IV line already going into her arm. Behind him, the SUV had become a fully engulfed wreck, black smoke pouring upward into the gray sky, firefighters now arriving to hose down what was left. The crowd had thinned somewhat, people climbing back into their cars, already scrolling through the footage they'd captured, already composing captions. Nobody asked Caleb his name. Nobody offered him a blanket, or a ride, or so much as a word of thanks. He didn't expect it. That was the strange part. Some small, hardened piece of him had already accepted that this was simply how it went. You did the thing that needed doing, and then the world moved on without you, the way it always had. He'd learned that lesson a long time ago, in ways that had nothing to do with car crashes. Sir, Garza again, jogging back over. We're taking her to Flagstaff Medical. You did good back there, real good. Most people wouldn't have gone near that thing. She's going to be okay, doing everything we can. You should really let someone look at that burn. Caleb glanced down at his forearm, an angry, weeping stripe of red and white blister, running from wrist to elbow, and felt nothing but a distant, muted throb, adrenaline still doing its work of holding the real pain at bay. I'll follow you to the hospital, he said. Sir, you really should get checked out yourself. I'll follow you to the hospital, Caleb said again, quieter this time, but with something underneath it that made Garza simply nod and turn away. The drive to Flagstaff Medical Center took 11 minutes. Caleb spent every one of them gripping the steering wheel with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, replaying the sound of Haley's scream, the smell of gasoline, the specific and terrible silence of a crowd that filmed instead of helped. He thought about the name she'd given him, Rylan Maddox, turning it over, wondering who the man was, wondering if he'd even be able to find him, wondering if any of this would matter in an hour. Once the adrenaline burned off and the world reminded him, the way it always did, exactly where he stood in it. He parked his truck in the farthest corner of the hospital lot, old habit. The corner spots were free, no risk of getting boxed in or towed, and walked into the emergency room dripping wet, blood dried dark on his knuckles, a burn screaming louder now that the adrenaline had started to fade. The waiting room went quiet when he walked in. Not dramatically, not all at once, but he felt the shift, the way heads turned and then turned away too quickly, the way a woman pulled her purse a little closer to her body, the way the man behind the reception desk's expression flattened into something professionally neutral and privately wary. Can I help you? The receptionist asked. I came in with a patient, Haley Maddox. Car accident, just came in by ambulance. Are you family? Caleb hesitated. No. I pulled her out of the wreck. The receptionist's eyebrows lifted slightly, not quite disbelief, but close to it. I'll need you to fill out some information. Do you need medical attention yourself? I'm fine, sir. That looks like a second-degree burn. I said I'm fine. Caleb caught himself, exhaled, tried again in a gentler tone. Sorry, I need to know she's okay. That's all I care about right now. The receptionist studied him a moment longer, taking in the state of his clothes, the mud caked into his boots, the truck keys clipped to a belt loop that had seen better years, and something in her expression cooled another few degrees. Have a seat. Someone will update you when there's information to share. Caleb sat. He sat for 40 minutes, then an hour, watching the clock above the reception desk tick forward in a way that felt deliberately cruel. Every time the double doors to the treatment area swung open, his head snapped up, hoping for news, and every time it wasn't for him, the disappointment settled a little deeper into his chest. Finally, a nurse appeared, scanning the waiting room. Family of Haley Maddox. Caleb stood so fast the plastic chair scraped loudly against the floor. That's me. I'm not family, but I'm the one who pulled her out. Is she okay? The nurse's gaze flicked over him with the same wary assessment he'd gotten from the receptionist, but there was something a little warmer in it now. She's stable. We've got her in for surgery on her leg compound fracture, but her vitals are good, and given what she went through, that's about as good news as we could hope for. Relief hit Caleb so hard his knees actually wobbled. Thank you. Thank you so much. You're the one who called her father? Rylan Maddox? I don't have a way to reach him. She just told me his name, right before she passed out. I was hoping someone here could... We're working on locating him now, the nurse said. You should really let someone look at that arm. This time, Caleb didn't argue. Whatever strength had carried him through the last 2 hours was starting to give out, and when a second nurse guided him toward an exam room, he let himself be led without protest, the adrenaline finally, completely gone, leaving behind nothing but exhaustion and a burn that throbbed in time with his pulse. They cleaned the wound, wrapped it, gave him something for the pain that made the edges of the room go soft and slow. A doctor stitched the gash along his forearm where the glass had cut deep, commenting quietly that he was lucky it hadn't hit the artery. "You're lucky, period," the doctor said. "What you did out there most people wouldn't have. Most trained professionals wouldn't have, honestly. Not without gear." Caleb didn't answer. He was staring at his own hands, at the dried blood still crusted in the creases of his knuckles, thinking about the exact moment the flames had reached the fuel line, how close it had been, how easily this could have ended differently. "You got somewhere to go tonight?" the doctor asked, not unkindly, glancing at the intake form where the address line had been left blank. "I'm fine," Caleb said, for what felt like the 100th time that day. The doctor didn't push. He finished the last stitch, taped a clean dressing over the burn, and told Caleb to keep it dry and come back if he saw any sign of infection. Caleb thanked him and walked back out to the waiting room, planning to sit there until someone told him Haley was out of surgery, planning to keep his promise and make sure her father got the message, planning, for the first time in longer than he could remember, to actually stay somewhere until a thing was finished. He didn't get the chance to sit back down. 2 police officers were waiting near the reception desk, and the moment Caleb stepped through the doors, their attention locked onto him with an intensity that made his stomach tighten. "Caleb Dawson?" the taller officer asked. "That's me. We need to ask you a few questions about the accident on Highway 89. "Sure, whatever you need." Caleb kept his voice easy. Cooperative, he had nothing to hide. After all, nothing except the truth of what had happened, which was that he'd done exactly what any decent person should have done. "I'm the one who pulled her out. I saw the whole thing." The shorter officer, a woman with a notepad already out, exchanged a glance with her partner that Caleb didn't like the look of. "We've got a witness statement that says you were seen near Miss Maddox's vehicle before the crash occurred. Care to explain that?" The words landed like a physical blow. "What?" "No, I was parked on the shoulder because of the storm. I didn't even see her car until it was already flipping. That's not what the witness says." "Then the witness is wrong." Caleb heard his own voice rising and forced himself to bring it back down, aware of exactly how this looked: a homeless man with blood on his hands, a burn on his arm, no fix address, suddenly being accused of something connected to the very accident he'd risked his life to respond to. "I pulled her out of a burning car. I got her out before it exploded. Why would I do that if I had something to do with the crash?" "We're not accusing you of anything yet," the taller officer said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. "We're just gathering information. There's also the matter of her missing backpack. It wasn't recovered at the scene. And one of the responding officers noted some irregularities with the vehicle's brake line that don't match up standard storm-related hydroplaning." Caleb's pulse spiked. "Irregularities, how?" "That's what we're trying to determine. You think somebody did something to her car? On purpose?" Neither officer answered directly, which told Caleb everything he needed to know. His mind raced back through the crash, the specific, wrong angle of the SUV as it left the road, the way it had flipped almost immediately rather than sliding, the kind of thing a mechanic's instincts noticed, even in the chaos of the moment, without fully registering it as strange until now. "I want to help," Caleb said. "Whatever you need. I'll answer anything. We'd like you to come down to the station and give a formal statement now." Now. Caleb glanced back toward the double doors leading to the surgical wing, toward the promise he'd made to a girl he'd known for less than 3 minutes before she lost consciousness in his arms. "Call my father, please. Tell him." "Can I at least leave a message?" Caleb asked. "For when her father gets here, I promised her I'd tell him what happened." The female officer's expression flickered something almost like sympathy breaking through the professional wall. "We'll make sure he's informed. Let's go, Mr. Dawson." Caleb went. What choice did he have? He walked out of the hospital between 2 police officers, aware of the stares following him across the parking lot, aware of how it looked, aware that somewhere in that building, a girl he'd saved was still unconscious on an operating table, while the world had already decided, within a matter of hours, that the man who pulled her from the fire deserved suspicion instead of gratitude. The interrogation room at the Flagstaff police station was small, cold, and lit by a single humming fluorescent light that made everything look faintly gray. Caleb sat across a metal table from a detective who introduced himself as Rourke, a heavy-set man in his 50s with tired eyes and a manila folder he kept tapping against the table like a metronome. "Walk me through it again," Rourke said. From the beginning, Caleb did. He told it exactly the same way he'd told it to the officers at the hospital, the storm, the sound of the crash, the fuel leak, the crowd that filmed instead of helped, breaking the window, freeing Haley's arm, carrying her clear seconds before the fire reached the tank. Rourke listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting something down. When Caleb finished, Rourke tapped the folder against the table twice more, then opened it. "We've got a witness man named Delacroix. Says he was 2 cars back, who claims he saw you standing near Miss Maddox's SUV about 10 minutes before the crash. Says you seemed to be, quote, messing with something underneath it. That's a lie." Caleb's hands curled into fists on the table. "I was in my truck the entire time before the crash. I never even saw her car until it was already flipping over. You understand how this looks, right? Homeless man, no fixed address, present at the scene of a crash that's looking less and less like an accident, and now a witness places you at the vehicle beforehand." "I understand how you're making it look," Caleb said, jaw tight. "I don't understand why nobody's asking why her brake line was tampered with, or where her backpack went, or who this Delacroix guy even is, or why he waited hours to say anything instead of telling the officers at the scene." Rourke's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted a flicker of consideration, maybe buried under the professional skepticism. "You're pretty quick to point fingers for someone who just met the victim 2 hours ago." "I'm quick to point out what doesn't add up," Caleb said. "You want to know what I noticed? That SUV didn't slide off the road like a normal hydroplane. It flipped almost a second. It started to lose control, like something up front gave out all at once. I've worked on cars my whole life. Detective. I know what a mechanical failure looks like versus what road conditions look like. Somebody should be checking that brake line real careful, and real soon, before whoever did it has time to notice you're onto them." For a long moment, Rourke just looked at him. Then he closed the folder, sat back in his chair, and said quietly, "You got somewhere you can stay tonight, Mr. Dawson? In case we need to reach you again, I've got my truck." "That's not what I asked." Caleb met his eyes without flinching. "That's my answer." Something passed between them that not quite trust. Not yet, but the beginning of something less hostile than where they'd started. Rourke exhaled, rubbed a hand over his face, and said, "We're going to need you to stick around town. Don't leave the area. I wasn't planning to. And Mr. Dawson, for what it's worth, pulling a stranger out of a burning car with your bare hands isn't the kind of thing guilty men usually do." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close to one. But it was something, and Caleb took it, because right now, it was all he was going to get. They released him a little after 9 that night. He walked out of the station into a city, gone quiet and wet under streetlights that reflected off puddles, like scattered coins, and made his way back toward the hospital on foot, since his truck was still sitting in the far corner of the medical center lot. The waiting room was different by the time he returned, quieter. Most of the daytime crowd gone, replaced by a scattering of tired families and a television playing muted news coverage in the corner. Caleb approached the reception desk, ready to ask about Haley's condition, and froze. On the muted television screen, a photo of himself, grainy, clearly pulled from someone's phone footage at the crash site, filled half the frame beneath a red breaking news banner. Caleb squinted at the caption scrolling underneath. Biker associate questioned in connection with suspicious highway crash. "That's not," Caleb started, then stopped, because there was no one to argue with, just a silent television, spinning, a version of events that had almost nothing to do with what had actually happened. He wasn't a biker. He'd never even sat on a motorcycle. But someone somewhere had decided that narrative served them better than the truth. and it had gone out to God knew how many screens before Caleb had even finished giving his statement. His hands started shaking again, and this time it wasn't from exhaustion. "Mr. Dawson?" He turned. The same nurse from earlier stood a few feet away, her expression unreadable. "Is she okay?" Caleb asked immediately. "Haley did the surgery. She's out of surgery. Stable. Resting." Relief hit him again, sharper this time, cutting through the anger the news broadcast had stirred up. "Can I see her?" "She's not conscious yet." But the nurse hesitated, glanced toward the hospital's front entrance, then back at Caleb. "Her father just arrived. You might want to be here when he does." "Is that a warning?" The nurse didn't quite smile, but something close to it touched the corner of her mouth. "Just information." Caleb was still trying to work out what that meant when he heard it distant at first, then closer, a low mechanical rumble building steadily until it became unmistakable. Engines, dozens of them. The sound rolled through the night like approaching thunder, vibrating in the windows of the waiting room, growing louder with every second, until the reception desk staff themselves rose from their chairs to look out toward the parking lot, where headlights, too many headlights, in too tight a formation to be anything but deliberate, began sweeping across the glass entrance doors in slow, steady waves. Caleb's pulse climbed into his throat. Whatever was coming, it was coming for the hospital. And somewhere underneath the mounting roar of engines, he thought he could already hear the first low murmur of a crowd gathering outside. Dozens of voices rising together, and one word threading through all of it that made every hair on the back of his neck stand on end. "Hell's Angels." The doors burst open before Caleb could even brace himself, and the waiting room, filled with the smell of rain and leather and exhaust. A wall of black jackets and silver patches pouring through the entrance like a tide that had finally decided to come ashore. Caleb's first instinct was to step back, some old animal part of his brain screaming that this was danger, that this was the moment things went from bad to worse, but nobody grabbed him. Nobody shouted. The men and women flooding into the hospital lobby weren't looking for a fight. They were looking for a girl. "Where is she?" The voice cut through the chaos like a blade, low, rough, carrying an authority that made even the hospital security guard near the entrance take an involuntary step backward. A broad-shouldered man in his 50s pushed through the crowd of his own people, gray beard streaked with white, a patch on his chest that read President in bold stitched letters. His eyes found the reception desk with a kind of desperate precision. "Haley Maddox, my daughter. Where is she?" The receptionist, to her credit, didn't flinch. "Sir, if you could just, I'm not asking twice." His voice cracked on the last word, and for just a second, the terrifying authority slipped, revealing something underneath it that looked a lot more like a frightened father than a motorcycle club president. "Please, someone just tell me if my little girl is alive." Caleb stepped forward before he'd fully decided to. "She's alive." Every head in the vicinity turned toward him. The man's eyes locked onto Caleb's with an intensity that felt like being struck. "She's out of surgery," Caleb continued, forcing his voice to stay steady even as 40 pairs of eyes bored into him. "She's stable. Resting. I was there. I'm the one who pulled her out of the car." For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then the man crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and grabbed Caleb by both shoulders, hard enough that Caleb thought for one wild second he was about to be thrown across the room. Instead, the man just stared at him, eyes wet, breath ragged. "You're the one," he said. "You're the one who got her out." "Yes, sir." They said on the news. The man's jaw tightened. "They said a biker did something to her car." "They said, I'm not a biker," Caleb said quietly. "I don't even own a motorcycle. I was parked on the shoulder because of the storm, and I heard the crash, and I went in and got her out before the fire reached the tank." That's the whole story. Whatever the news is saying, it's wrong. The man studied him for a long moment, really studied him, the way someone does when they're trying to read a person down to the bone. Then his grip on Caleb's shoulders loosened, and something in his weathered face cracked open. "Rylan Maddox," he said. "That's my daughter in there. She told me to call you. Right before she passed out, she said your name, and then she went quiet. And I didn't have a phone number. I didn't have anything. Justin's own composure was starting to fray now. The weight of the entire day finally catching up with him all at once. I promised her I'd get word to you. I'm sorry it took this long. Ryland's throat worked. You kept your promise. That's more than most people manage in a lifetime. He turned, and the crowd behind him, dozens of leather-clad men and women who had gone eerily silent, watching this exchange with something like reverence parted instantly at his unspoken command. I need to see her. They said she's not conscious yet, Caleb offered, but she's stable. The doctor said, take me to whoever's in charge. The nurse from earlier stepped forward, visibly overwhelmed by the sheer number of people now crowding the waiting room, but managing her composure with practiced professionalism. Mr. Maddox, I can take you back, but only 2 visitors at a time. Hospital policy. Fine. Whatever you need. Ryland turned back to Caleb before following her, and for a moment, his eyes searched Caleb's face again, like he was trying to memorize it. You're not going anywhere. Are you? No, sir. Good. Ryland's hand came down on Caleb's shoulder one more time. Gentler this time. Because we're not finished talking. Not by a long shot. He disappeared through the double doors with the nurse, and the waiting room exhaled as one collective breath, the tension that had gripped the room since the engines first roared into the parking lot finally beginning to loosen. Caleb sank into the nearest chair, hands trembling now with an exhaustion so complete. It felt like something separate from his own body. A woman in a leather vest, silver-haired, maybe 60, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, sat down in the chair beside him without asking permission. You got a name? She asked. Caleb, I'm Dana. Dana Brooks. She studied him with the same unnerving thoroughness Ryland had. You a friend of the club? Never met any of you before tonight. Huh. Dana's eyebrows lifted slightly. You went into a burning car for a girl you'd never met, whose family you'd never met, expecting nothing in return. I wasn't expecting anything, Caleb said. I still don't. That's either the stupidest thing I've ever heard, Dana said, or the smartest. Give me a minute, I'll figure out which. Before Caleb could respond, the television mounted in the corner of the waiting room, still playing muted news, coverage cut to a new segment, and this time, Dana's attention snapped to it immediately. The chyron scrolling across the bottom read, homeless man questioned after suspicious highway crash, possible ties to outlaw motorcycle club. Turn that up, Dana said sharply to no one in particular, and a nearby club member grabbed the remote off a side table and complied. Sources indicate the man, identified as Caleb Dawson, was questioned by Flagstaff police in connection with the crash that injured 22-year-old nursing student Haley Maddox, daughter of a prominent local motorcycle club president. Witnesses report Dawson was seen near the vehicle prior to the accident, though police have not yet confirmed whether charges will be filed. That's a lie, Caleb said, his voice rising before he could stop it. That witness is lying. I told the detective exactly what happened. I was nowhere near her car before the crash. I believe you, Dana said, cutting through his rising panic with a calm that somehow made it worse and better at the same time. The question is, who's feeding this story to the press, and why they're feeding it so fast? Most departments sit on details like this for days. This hit the air less than 3 hours after the crash. Somebody wanted it out there quick. Caleb turned to look at her fully. You think somebody's trying to make me look guilty on purpose? I think, Dana said slowly, that a car doesn't just flip like that on a straight highway without something going seriously wrong with it first. And I think it's an awfully big coincidence that the one witness placing you near that vehicle happened to come forward hours after everyone else at the scene already gave their statements. I used to be a prosecutor, Mr. Dawson, 22 years. I know what a manufactured story smells like, and this one reeks. Before Caleb could ask what she meant, the double doors swung open again, and Ryland reappeared, face pale, eyes red-rimmed but steady. He crossed the room straight to Caleb. She's asking for you, he said. Caleb blinked. Me? She woke up for a few minutes. First thing she asked was whether the man who saved her made it out okay. Ryland's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Come on. She wants to thank you herself. Caleb followed him through the double doors, down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, past rooms where machines beeped in soft, steady rhythms. Rylan stopped outside a door near the end of the hall, hand resting on the frame for a moment like he needed to steady himself before going back in. She's got tubes, monitors, all of it, Rylan said quietly. Don't let it scare you. She's tougher than she looks. Inside, Haley lay propped up against a bank of pillows, one leg elevated and encased in a temporary cast, an IV line taped to the back of her hand, a bandage wrapped around her forehead where the glass had cut her. But her eyes were open, and when they found Caleb, something in her exhausted face lit up with unmistakable relief. You're okay, she said, voice hoarse. They wouldn't tell me if you were okay. I'm fine, Caleb said, moving closer to the bed. Just a burn and some stitches. Nothing that won't heal. You went into a burning car for me. You'd have done the same for anyone. No, Haley said, with a surprising firmness for someone who'd just come out of surgery. Most people wouldn't. Most people stood there and filmed it. Her eyes glistened. I heard them. Before you came, I heard people talking about how dangerous it was, how they should wait for the fire department. Nobody moved, except you. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, and for a moment the room fell into a silence that felt strangely peaceful after the chaos of the last several hours. Sweetheart, Rylan said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking his daughter's hand. The police are saying some things about the crash that don't add up, about your brakes, about your backpack going missing. Do you remember anything before it happened? Anything at all? Haley's expression shifted, fear flickering across it in a way that had nothing to do with the physical pain of her injuries. My backpack, she said. Did they find my backpack? No, Rylan said. Why? What was in it? Haley's hand tightened around her father's, and when she spoke, her voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. Dad, I need you to listen to me, and I need you to believe me, because I know how this is going to sound. I'll believe you. Always. I've been volunteering at the Hargrove Rehabilitation Center for almost a year now, Haley said, helping with intake, filing, that kind of thing. 2 weeks ago, I found something in the records I wasn't supposed to see. Financial statements. Patient billing records that didn't match what patients were actually being charged. Insurance claims for treatments that never happened. Her breathing quickened, monitors beeping slightly faster in response. The director, Victor Langford. He's been stealing from the clinic's funding for years. Skimming off patient accounts, selling private medical information to some kind of data broker. I found spreadsheets, wire transfers, everything. I made copies. Haley. Rylan's voice had gone very still. Are you telling me you had proof of a crime in your backpack the day your car flipped over on a straight highway in clear conditions? I was going to bring it to a lawyer, Haley said, tears spilling over now. I didn't know who else to trust with it. I was scared someone at the clinic would find out I'd seen it before I could get it somewhere safe. Dana, who had followed them into the room without either Rylan or Caleb noticing, stepped forward from the doorway, her expression sharpening into something focused and dangerous. Haley, did anyone at the clinic know you'd found those records? Haley's eyes widened as the memory surfaced. There was a man. About a week ago. I saw him going through the same filing cabinet where I'd found everything. And when he saw me there, he asked what I was doing. I said I was just filing intake forms. He didn't say anything else, but he watched me the rest of the day. I thought I was being paranoid. What did he look like? Dana asked. Tall, dark hair. He had this tattoo on his forearm, some kind of company logo, I think. Wraith Security. Maybe? I only saw it for a second. Dana and Rylan exchanged a look that made Caleb's stomach turn cold. That's not paranoia, sweetheart, Rylan said quietly. That's somebody figuring out you'd found something you weren't supposed to find. The room went silent except for the steady, mechanical beep of Haley's heart monitor, each pulse suddenly sounding to Caleb like a countdown. You think somebody did this to her car on purpose, Caleb said, the words coming out flat, disbelieving, even as every instinct told him it was true. Because of some records, I think Dana said slowly, that we've got a homeless mechanic being framed as a suspect A missing backpack full of evidence, a brake line the police are already calling suspicious, and a man who works for a security company watching a 22-year-old girl go through financial documents that could put people in prison. I don't believe in that many coincidences stacking up in one day. Then we need to tell the police everything, Caleb said. Right now. We will, Dana said, but carefully. If Langford's got enough reach to plant a fake witness against you within 3 hours of the crash, and enough reach to get that story on the local news before official statements were even released, then he's got somebody on the inside somewhere, police, media, maybe both. We go in loud and unprepared. We hand him time to destroy whatever's left of the evidence and bury this deeper than it already is. Rylan looked up at Caleb, something new in his expression now, not just gratitude, but a kind of fierce, protective calculation. You said Delacroix, the witness who claims he saw you near her car. You never met him before today. Never even heard the name until Detective Rourke said it. Then somebody paid him or pressured him to say what he said, Rylan said. And that means somebody decided, within hours of my daughter almost dying, that framing the man who saved her life was worth the risk. That tells me this isn't small. That tells me whoever's behind this is scared enough of what she found to move fast and move dirty. Haley's hand found Caleb's, gripping it with surprising strength for someone still hooked to an IV. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to land on you. You saved my life, and now you're the one they're trying to blame. Don't apologize, Caleb said, and meant it completely. You didn't do anything wrong. Finding the truth isn't a crime, even if somebody's trying to make it look like one. He's right, Rylan said. None of this is on you, sweetheart. Rest. Let us handle the rest of it. A doctor appeared in the doorway then, gently but firmly informing them that Haley needed to rest, that she'd already exceeded her allotted visiting time, given the severity of her surgery, and that further conversation could resume in the morning. Rylan kissed his daughter's forehead, promised he wasn't going anywhere, and reluctantly led Caleb and Dana back out into the hallway, where the weight of everything Haley had just revealed seemed to settle over all three of them at once. I need to sit down, Caleb admitted, and Dana guided him toward a small alcove of chairs near a vending machine, where the fluorescent lighting buzzed overhead and the hospital's late-night quiet pressed in around them. You've had one hell of a day, Mr. Dawson, Dana said, lowering herself into the chair across from him. That's putting it lightly. Rylan remained standing, arms crossed, staring down the hallway toward his daughter's room like he could keep watch over her through solid walls by sheer force of will. I want to know everything about Victor Langford, he said. Everything. Where he lives, who he answers to, what the security company is, all of it. That's not going to be quick, Dana said. Or safe. Done the wrong way. I don't care about quick. I care about my daughter being safe. And I care about the man who saved her life, not going to prison for a crime that was clearly staged the second the doctors confirmed she was going to live. Rylan's voice had gone hard now, the grief momentarily giving way to something colder and more focused. Dana, you were a prosecutor. You know how these things get built. Help me build one against Langford instead. I can do that, Dana said. But it's going to take more than the three of us. We need the actual evidence Haley found, which means finding her backpack or reconstructing what was in it another way. We need to establish who tampered with that brake line and prove it was deliberate. And we need to find out exactly who Delacroix is and why he's willing to lie to police. Caleb, who had been quiet through most of this exchange, spoke up. I might be able to help with the brake line. Both of them turned to look at him. I've spent my whole life working on cars, Caleb said. Shops, junkyards, roadside repairs, whatever paid. If somebody tampered with a brake line to cause a controlled failure at a specific point, there's a particular kind of damage that leaves behind. Cuts look different from wear. Deliberate weakening looks different from age or road damage. If the police let me anywhere near that vehicle, or even photographs of it, I could probably tell you within a few minutes whether it was sabotage. Rylan studied him for a long moment. You'd do that? Even knowing it might be the same evidence that clears you of suspicion. or buries you deeper, depending on what it shows. I know what happened, Caleb said simply. I'm not scared of the truth. I'm scared of a story getting repeated enough times that people start believing it instead. Something shifted in Ryland's face, then a kind of respect settling into place that hadn't fully been there before. Even after the hospital room, even after everything Caleb had already done. Detective Rourke, he said. That's who questioned you? Yes, sir, I know Rourke. Not well, but enough. He's not dirty, as far as I've ever heard. Just cautious, and probably getting pressure from somewhere above him to close this fast and clean. With you, as the easiest available answer. Ryland pulled out his phone. I'm calling him right now. If Langford's got someone feeding false stories to reporters, the faster we get real information in front of an honest cop, the faster this unravels the right way instead of the wrong one. It's almost 11 at night, Dana pointed out. Rourke won't mind. Not once he hears what I have to say. Ryland stepped a few feet away to make the call, and Dana turned back to Caleb, studying him again with that same sharp, evaluating look. You know what's strange, she said. In 22 years as a prosecutor, I put away every kind of criminal you can imagine. Men who lied for money, men who lied for power, men who lied just because lying came easier to them than telling the truth. And in all that time, I don't think I've met more than a handful of people who ran toward danger with absolutely nothing to gain from it. I didn't think about gain, Caleb said. I just heard someone screaming, and I couldn't make myself walk away. That's exactly my point, Dana said. Most people can. Most people do every single day, in 100 small ways nobody notices. The fact that you couldn't, that tells me something about you that a background check never would. You did a background check on me already? Dana's mouth curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Force of habit. Relax. There's nothing in it but a rough childhood and a lot of hard work. No warrants, no priors, nothing that would explain why somebody's suddenly so desperate to make you look guilty. So it really is just because I was there, Caleb said quietly. Wrong place, right time. And now I'm the easiest person in the story to blame. For now, Dana said. That's the thing about lies built fast under pressure. They're rarely built well. Whoever set this up was thinking about tonight's headline, not next week's cross-examination. That gives us room to work. Ryland returned a few minutes later, expression unreadable. Rourke's willing to meet in the morning. Says if what I'm telling him checks out, he'll personally push for forensic re-examination of the brake line and vehicle. Says he'd already flagged some inconsistencies himself, but didn't have enough to push back against whoever's rushing this. Did he say who was rushing it? Dana asked. No, but he sounded like a man who already suspected the answer and didn't like it. Ryland sat down heavily in the chair beside Caleb, the exhaustion of the day finally visible on him now that the initial crisis had passed. You should get some rest, he said to Caleb. You've been through more today than most people go through in a year. I'm fine staying here, Caleb said automatically, in case Haley needs anything or the police son. Ryland's voice softened in a way that caught Caleb off guard. You've done more than enough for one day. Let us take it from here for a few hours. You need to sleep, and that arm needs to heal. Caleb hesitated, some deep-worn instinct telling him that if he left now, if he let himself walk away, something would slip through his fingers that he wouldn't get back. But exhaustion was pulling at every part of him, and the burn on his arm had started throbbing again beneath the bandage, sharp and insistent. I've got my truck in the lot, Caleb said finally. I'll be close by. If anything happens, you'll be the first call, Ryland said. He extended his hand, and Caleb shook it, feeling the callous strength in the older man's grip. Thank you, for my daughter, for everything you did today, and everything I have a feeling you're about to keep doing, whether anybody asks you to or not. Caleb managed a tired half-smile. Somebody's got to make sure the truth doesn't get buried. That somebody used to just be me and people like Dana, Ryland said. Looks like the club's got a new addition to the cause, whether he asked for the patch or not. Caleb didn't know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded and made his way back out through the hospital, past the dozens of club members who had settled into a quiet, watchful vigil throughout the waiting room and the surrounding parking lot, an unmistakable wall of solidarity that hadn't existed 12 hours earlier and now seemed like it might never fully disperse. He found his truck in the far corner of the lot, climbed inside, and sat there for a long moment without starting the engine, staring at his own reflection in the dark windshield, exhausted, bandaged, bloodied. A man the news was calling a suspect, and a girl's father was calling a hero, both labels sitting strangely on his shoulders in a way he hadn't asked for and didn't fully know how to carry. His phone buzzed. Caleb frowned, digging it out of his jacket pocket, an old model, cracked screen, barely functional, and saw a text from an unknown number. "You should have kept driving." Caleb's blood went cold. He stared at the message for a long moment, thumb hovering over the screen, and then, before he could stop himself, typed back, "Who is this?" The response came almost instantly. "Someone who knows what's really in that backpack. And someone who knows you're about to find out the hard way that helping her was the worst mistake you'll ever make." Caleb's hand tightened around the phone, hard enough that his knuckles went white against the burned dressing. He looked up, scanning the dark parking lot through his windshield rows of parked cars, distant streetlights, the hospital's glowing entrance far behind him, searching for any sign of movement, any sign of someone watching. The lot was empty, or at least, it looked empty. He typed back with shaking hands, "I'm not scared of you." The reply took longer this time, nearly a full minute, long enough that Caleb began to wonder if the conversation had ended. Then his phone buzzed one final time, "You will be." Caleb stared at the screen until the message blurred, then locked his phone, shoved it into his pocket, and started the engine with hands that hadn't stopped trembling since the moment he'd broken through Haley's shattered window nearly 12 hours earlier. Whatever he'd walked into today, it was clear now that it went far deeper than a single crooked clinic director, far deeper than a missing backpack full of financial records. Somebody out there already knew his name, knew where he'd been standing tonight, knew enough to threaten him directly. Within hours of a crash they clearly hadn't expected anyone to survive. And as Caleb pulled out of the hospital parking lot into the wet, empty streets of Flagstaff, one thought settled over him with a cold, unshakable certainty: whoever had sent that message wasn't finished. Not even close. Caleb didn't sleep. He sat in his truck in the hospital parking lot with his phone gripped in one hand, engine idling for warmth, replaying the words on the screen over and over until they stopped looking like letters and started looking like a threat carved into his skull. Someone who knows what's really in that backpack. Whoever had sent it knew things they shouldn't know: his name, his location, the exact hour to strike with a message meant to break him before morning even arrived. He didn't break. If anything, something in him hardened. By 6 a.m., pale gray light creeping over the mountains outside Flagstaff, Caleb walked back into the hospital lobby to find Rylan already there. Dressed in yesterday's clothes, dark circles under his eyes, a paper coffee cup crushed forgotten in one hand. "You didn't go home," Rylan said. "Not a question. Neither did you. Couldn't." Rylan's eyes flicked toward the corridor leading to Haley's room. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that SUV on fire." Caleb hesitated, then pulled out his phone and held it toward Rylan without a word. Rylan read the messages, and Caleb watched something in the older man's face go very still and very dangerous. The grief of the last 12 hours curdling into something colder. "When did you get this last night?" "Right after I left." "Show Dana." "Now." Rylan was already dialing before he finished the sentence. "And show Rourke." This isn't a warning anymore. This is a confession that somebody out there knows exactly what happened to that brake line. Dana arrived within the hour, and by the time Detective Rourke walked through the hospital's sliding doors at 7:15, jacket rumpled, coffee in hand, Caleb had already told the story twice. Rourke read the messages on Caleb's phone in silence, jaw working. "This changes things," he admitted. "A witness lying about your location is one thing. A direct threat sent to your personal number within hours of the crash is another. Whoever's behind this isn't just covering tracks anymore. They're panicking." "Panicking people make mistakes," Dana said. "Panicking people also get desperate," Rourke countered. "And desperate people do worse things than lie. Then let's move faster than they can." Rylan said. Detective, I want that brake line looked at today. Not next week. Today. Rourke exhaled slowly, glancing between the three of them, a grieving biker president, a former prosecutor with sharp eyes, and a homeless mechanic with stitches in his arm, and a threat on his phone. I can request an expedited forensic review. I can't guarantee how fast it moves once it's out of my hands. What if I looked at it first? Caleb said. Everyone turned to him. Off the record, Caleb continued. Not as evidence, just let me see it. Photographs, if not the actual vehicle. I told you already, I know cars. I'll know within minutes if that brake line failed on its own or if somebody helped it along. Rourke studied him for a long moment, then pulled out his own phone, scrolled, and turned the screen toward Caleb. Impound photos, taken last night before the vehicle got processed. Caleb leaned in, and the noise of the hospital lobby seemed to fall away as his eyes moved across the image, the crumpled undercarriage, the scorched metal, and there, just barely visible at the edge of the frame, a section of brake line that made his stomach drop. There, Caleb said, pointing. Right there. See how that cut doesn't taper? A line that fails from wear, from age, from road damage it frays. It stretches thin and splits ragged like a rope, pulling apart strand by strand. This is clean, almost surgical. Somebody cut partway through that line on purpose, left just enough material to hold under normal driving, and let the vibration and pressure from highway speed finish the job. You're certain? Rourke asked. I've replaced more brake lines than I can count, Caleb said. I've seen worn ones, damaged ones, ones that failed because some shop cut corners on a repair. This isn't any of that. This was designed to fail at speed. Whoever did it didn't want her to survive. The words landed heavy in the silence that followed. Ryland's hand curled into a fist at his side, and Dana's expression sharpened into the focused calm Caleb had already come to recognize as her most dangerous state. That's enough for me, Rourke said quietly. I'll push the lab to confirm it. But if what you're seeing holds up, we're not looking at an accident investigation anymore. We're looking at attempted murder. Then let's find whoever did it, Ryland said, before they try again. Rourke's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, and stepped a few feet away to answer, his voice dropping too low to follow. When he returned, his expression had changed, tighter, more careful. That was my captain, he said. Apparently there's already pressure coming down from somewhere to close this out as a straightforward accident, weather-related. No foul play. He looked directly at Caleb. And to move forward with charges against you for obstruction, based on inconsistencies in witness statements. Based on Delacroix, Caleb said flatly. Based on Delacroix, Rourke confirmed. I don't like it. I've been doing this 20 years, and I know when somebody's leaning on a case from above, but my captain didn't get specific about who's applying the pressure, and I can't exactly refuse a direct order without more than my gut telling me something's wrong. Then get more, Dana said. Give us time. A day. 2, if you can manage it. We'll find something solid enough that your captain can't wave it away. Rourke hesitated, glancing between them, clearly weighing his career against his conscience. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and decisive. 48 hours. That's what I can buy you. After that, I don't know what happens. Caleb felt the weight of the clock settle onto his shoulders immediately, ticking down towards something he couldn't yet see the shape of. They regrouped that afternoon in a back booth of a diner 3 blocks from the hospital, the kind of place with cracked vinyl seats and a waitress who refilled coffee without being asked. Ryland had called in Dana, 2 senior club members named Otis and Frank, and Caleb, all of them hunched over, a table scattered with notebooks and a laptop Dana had brought along. Wraith Security, Dana said, turning the laptop screen toward the group. Haley mentioned the tattoo company logo on the arm of the man she saw going through the filing cabinet. Took some digging. But Wraith Security Solutions is a private firm contracted by several clinical facilities in the county, including Hargrove Rehabilitation Center, Caleb finished. Exactly. Officially, they provide facility security. Cameras, guards, that kind of thing. Unofficially. Dana clicked to another screen. I found 3 separate, small claims filing against them over the last 2 years. Intimidation complaints. Nothing that stuck. Nothing that ever made it past a settlement, but a pattern all the same. So Langford hires a security company that does more than watch cameras, Ryland said. That's my read, Dana agreed. Which means whoever cut that brake line probably works for Wraith on Langford's orders, trying to make sure Haley never got that evidence to a lawyer. And the missing backpack, Otis said, a heavy-set man with a gray ponytail and forearms covered in faded tattoos. If they've got it, they've probably already destroyed it. Maybe, Caleb said slowly, an idea forming. Or maybe they didn't get the chance. Every eye at the table turned to him. Think about the timeline, Caleb continued. The crash happens on Highway 89. Emergency responders show up fast. The fire department's already been called before I even get to the vehicle. If somebody planted the sabotage, but wasn't actually there to grab the backpack the second the crash happened, there's a window. A short one, but a window. Maybe the backpack got thrown clear in the crash. Maybe it's still out there somewhere. Or maybe somebody local picked it up before the scene got processed. The witness, Dana said suddenly. Delacroix. If he was really there, watching closely enough to claim he saw Caleb near the vehicle beforehand, then he was close enough to see the backpack too, Ryland finished. If it went flying in the crash, we need to find him, Caleb said. That's dangerous, Dana warned. If he's already lying for Langford's people, approaching him directly could tip our hand. Then we don't approach him, Caleb said. We watch him. We find out where he goes, who he talks to. I know how to blend into places most people don't look twice at. Shelters, diners, the side streets, where the mechanics and the shift workers hang around. Nobody up top ever really sees us. That works in our favor now. Ryland studied him for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, respect, deepening into something closer to trust. You've got people, he said. The kind of people this whole city walks past without seeing. Everybody's got people, Caleb said. Most of the time, nobody bothers to ask them anything. That evening, Caleb walked into the Sunrise Mission Shelter on the edge of downtown Flagstaff, a building he knew well from months of cold nights when his truck's heater had given out and pride hadn't yet outweighed the need for 4 solid walls. The volunteers there recognized him immediately, greeting him with the easy familiarity of people who'd shared meals and hard nights together. Caleb, heard you were the one on the news, said Marisol, a woman in her 40s who ran the evening shift, her voice carrying equal parts concern and disbelief. They're saying you had something to do with that crash. They're wrong, Caleb said simply. I pulled her out. That's the whole truth of it. Course you did, Marisol said, shaking her head. Anybody who knows you knows that. What do you need? Information. There's a man named Delacroix might drive a dark sedan, might have been out on Highway 89 the day of the crash. I need to know where he spends his time, who he talks to, anything at all. Marisol didn't hesitate. I'll ask around. We got eyes all over this city that nobody else bothers looking at. Word moved fast through channels most people never noticed existed: night shift gas station clerks, roadside vendors packing up their carts after dark, mechanics working late in garages with their bay doors still open, shelter regulars who spent their days walking the same streets over and over, invisible to everyone except each other. By midnight, Caleb had 3 separate leads, and by the following afternoon, he had an address. Delacroix turned out to be a mid-level manager at a logistics company on the edge of town, a nervous, thin man who startled visibly when Caleb approached him outside a gas station, Dana and Ryland waiting a discreet distance away in a parked car. I don't want any trouble, Delacroix said immediately, backing toward his car. Neither do I, Caleb said, keeping his voice calm, non-threatening. I just want to know why you told the police you saw me near that SUV before the crash. Because I wasn't there, and you know it. Delacroix's eyes darted toward the parked car where Ryland sat watching, and something like genuine fear crossed his face. Look, man, somebody paid me, okay? Somebody paid me to say I saw a guy matching your description near the vehicle. I never even saw the actual crash happen. I just heard about it after and made up the rest. Who paid you? I don't know his name. Some guy contacted me through a burner number, wired money to an account, Told me exactly what to say to police if they asked. Delacroix's hands were shaking now. I didn't think it'd turn into this much. I thought it was just, I don't know, insurance fraud or something small. I needed the money. Man, I've got bills. Did you see anything else out there? Caleb pressed. A backpack, maybe. Thrown from the vehicle during the crash? Delacroix hesitated, and that hesitation told Caleb everything. Before the man even spoke, there was a bag, Delacroix admitted quietly. Landed in the brush near the guardrail. I grabbed it before the cops showed up, figured maybe there was something valuable in it. Cash, jewelry, whatever. But when I opened it, it was just papers, financial statements, spreadsheets, stuff I didn't understand. I still have it. Wasn't worth anything to sell. Caleb's pulse spiked. Where is it now? My apartment. Look, I don't want to be involved in whatever this actually is. Just take the bag, forget you talked to me, and I'll tell the police I made a mistake about seeing you at the scene. You'll do more than that, Dana said, stepping out of the car and approaching with the calm, unstoppable energy of someone who had spent 2 decades taking apart nervous men exactly like this one. You're going to give a full statement to Detective Rourke about who paid you and what you saw. In exchange, we'll make sure the DA knows you cooperated. Delacroix's shoulders sagged in a mixture of relief and dread. Fine, okay, I'll talk. Just get me the bag first. Before anybody realizes, I still have it. They retrieved the backpack that same evening, and Dana spent the following hours photographing every document inside it under careful chain of custody protocol, her prosecutorial instincts kicking into high gear. Spreadsheets detailing years of skimmed patient funds, insurance claims for treatments that had never been administered, wire transfers to shell accounts, and buried near the bottom, a series of emails between Victor Langford and a private data broker negotiating the sale of thousands of patients' private medical records. This is enough to end him, Dana said quietly, scrolling through the evidence with a kind of grim satisfaction. This is enough to end all of them. But satisfaction gave way to alarm within the hour, when Caleb's phone buzzed with another message from the same unknown number. We know you have it. Bring it back, or the next accident won't have a survivor. Caleb showed the message to Rylan without a word. Rylan's face went hard as stone. They know already, Caleb said. How could they know already? We just got the backpack an hour ago. Delacroix, Dana said grimly. He must have reached out to whoever paid him, tried to cover himself once he realized how deep this actually goes. Rylan was already moving, phone pressed to his ear, calling club members to converge on the diner where they'd been working. We need to move this evidence somewhere they can't reach it, and we need to do it now, before whoever's behind this decides destroying it is worth any risk. They didn't get the chance. Frank, one of the senior club members, burst into the diner 20 minutes later, breathless, phone in hand. Repair yard on Cedar Street, the old Hendricks place. Been abandoned. 2 years somebody just tipped off one of our guys that a black van's been parked there since this morning. Same description as the van Haley said was following her the day of the crash. They're not trying to get the backpack back, Caleb realized suddenly, the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. They already know we've got it protected. They're trying to destroy anything else that might connect them, anywhere evidence might still exist. If they had a base of operations, somewhere they planned this, the Hendricks yard, Rylan said. That's where they're burning it all. Then we need to get there first, Caleb said, already moving toward the door. Caleb, wait, Dana started, but he was already gone, adrenaline overriding caution, the same way it had the moment he'd first heard Haley screaming from inside that flipped SUV. Rylan caught up to him in the parking lot, grabbing his arm. You don't go in there alone. Not against people who cut brake lines and send death threats. Then come with me, Caleb said. But we can't wait. If there's anything left in that yard, connecting Langford to what happened, and they burn it before Rourke gets a warrant, we lose our best chance at proving any of this beyond what's already in that backpack. Rylan's jaw tightened, and for a moment Caleb watched the calculation hat behind his eyes, the father who wanted to protect everyone around him, warring with the club president who understood, better than anyone, the value of moving fast when the moment demanded it. Otis, Frank with us. Everybody else stays here with Dana and the evidence. Nobody touches that backpack except her. They took 2 vehicles, engines roaring through the darkening streets of Flagstaff toward the edge of town, where the Hendricks repair yard sat abandoned behind rusted chain-link fencing, exactly as Frank had described. The black van was there, parked near a collapsed garage bay, and beyond it, faint orange light flickered from somewhere inside the structure. "They're burning something," Caleb said, heart hammering. They moved fast, quiet, Otis and Frank fanning out along the fence line, while Caleb and Rylan approached the main structure directly. Through a gap in the collapsed wall, Caleb saw 2 men in dark clothing feeding papers into a metal drum fire. Flames licking up orange and hungry, consuming what little remained of Langford's paper trail. "Stop!" Rylan's voice thundered through the ruined structure, and the 2 men spun, one of them immediately reaching for something at his waist. Everything happened fast. After that, a blur of shouting, the metallic gleam of a weapon, Rylan lunging forward not towards safety, but directly into the path of danger, shoving Caleb hard out of the line of fire a fraction of a second before the man pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, cracking off twisted metal somewhere behind them, but the second man closed the distance and swung something heavy, a length of pipe, that caught Rylan across the ribs with a sickening crack. Rylan went down hard, and Caleb's entire world narrowed to a single point of white-hot fury. He didn't think. He moved, tackling the man with the pipe before he could swing again, both of them crashing into a stack of rusted metal that collapsed around them in a shower of debris. Caleb absorbed a blow across his jaw that sent stars exploding across his vision. But adrenaline kept him moving, kept him fighting, some part of him screaming that if he went down now, Rylan wouldn't get back up either. Otis and Frank arrived seconds later, and whatever advantage the 2 men had counted on evaporated instantly against the reality of 2 heavy-set club members who fought with the practiced efficiency of people who had survived worse than a burning junkyard. The gunman went down under Frank's weight, weapon kicked clear across the concrete. The man with the pipe, seeing his partner overwhelmed, made a break for the van, but Caleb was faster, tackling him from behind just before he reached the door. "Who sent you?" Caleb demanded, pinning the man against the van's side panel, blood dripping from his own split lip. "Who told you to burn this?" The man said nothing, jaw clenched, eyes darting toward the road as if help might still arrive. "Answer him," Rylan said, struggling upright, despite the obvious pain radiating from his ribs, one hand pressed against his side. "Or we let the police sort it out, and I promise you, once Victor Langford realizes you got caught, he will not lift one finger to protect either of you." Something in that threat landed harder than any physical intimidation could have. The man's shoulders sagged. "Langford," he admitted quietly. "He told us to clean out the yard. Said if the girl's evidence got matched up with anything found here, it'd tie everything together. The brake line, the whole thing." "Where's Langford now?" Caleb asked. "I don't know. I swear, I don't know. We just take orders. We don't know where he sleeps at night." Sirens rose in the distance, growing louder, and within minutes, Detective Rourke's unmarked car pulled through the yard's broken gate, followed by 2 patrol units, red and blue lights strobing across the rusted wreckage and the still smoldering drum fire. Rourke took in the scene with wide eyes, 2 men restrained on the ground, a fire barely contained, Rylan clutching his ribs, Caleb bleeding from a split lip, and shook his head slowly. "You couldn't wait for a warrant." "They were burning evidence," Rylan said through gritted teeth. "You want to explain to a judge why we should have stood outside and watched." Rourke didn't argue the point. He crouched beside the metal drum, using a gloved hand to pull out several partially burned documents before the fire consumed them entirely, examining them with growing focus. "This is Langford's letterhead," he said quietly. "Financial documents. Some of this survived enough to read." He looked up at Caleb and Rylan, something resolving behind his eyes. "This is enough. Combined with what you already recovered from the backpack, this is more than enough to move on Langford directly." "Then move," Rylan said, wincing as paramedics arrived to check his ribs. "I will. Tonight." Rourke stood, brushing soot from his hands, glancing toward the two restrained men being loaded into patrol cars. But you three need to understand something. This isn't small anymore. If Langford's willing to order attempted murder to protect this operation and willing to send men to burn evidence rather than let it surface, then whatever he's protecting goes deeper than one clinic's stolen funds. We're talking a real network here. Contractors, maybe people inside my own department feeding information. I need everything you have, and I need it clean, chain of custody intact, or none of it holds up when this goes to court. You'll have it, Caleb said. By the time paramedics finished checking Ryland's ribs bruised, not broken, though painful enough to leave him grimacing with every breath word, had already begun spreading through the club's network. The way news always seemed to travel fast among people the world assumed weren't paying attention. By midnight, Caleb's phone lit up with a message from Dana confirming that Rourke's captain, faced with hard forensic evidence and a documented assault, had finally authorized a full task force investigation into Victor Langford, Wraith Security, and the broader network feeding off Hargrove Rehabilitation Center's patients. Standing amid the wreckage of the Hendricks yard, blood on his knuckles, soot on his clothes, Caleb felt something shift inside him, not relief exactly. Not yet, but the first real sense that the story was tilting, however slowly, toward the truth. Ryland, leaning heavily against the hood of a patrol car while paramedics finished wrapping his ribs, caught Caleb's eye across the wreckage and managed a pained, exhausted smile. You know, he said, most people spend their whole lives waiting for somebody else to fix what's broken. You just go ahead and fix it yourself, don't you? Somebody has to, Caleb said quietly. Might as well be somebody nobody expects to bother trying. By sunrise, word of the confrontation had spread far beyond the club's inner circle, rippling outward through Flagstaff in a way none of them had fully anticipated. Reporters who had spent the previous day repeating a manufactured story about a suspicious biker associate now scrambled to catch up with a very different narrative one involving a corrupt clinic director, stolen patient funds, and a homeless mechanic who'd uncovered sabotage the police themselves had initially missed. And as the first light broke over the mountains outside Flagstaff, a sound began building in the distance, once again engines. Dozens of them, then hundreds, gathering from every direction toward the heart of the city. Caleb stood in the hospital parking lot, exhausted, bruised, watching headlight after headlight sweep down the road in slow, disciplined formation, carrying not violence, but something that looked unmistakably like an entire city about to witness justice arrive on two wheels. The engines kept coming, wave after wave of headlights, sweeping down the road toward the hospital. And Caleb stood rooted in the parking lot, watching hundreds of riders assemble into something that looked less like a motorcycle club and more like an army arriving to bear witness. He didn't have time to marvel at it for long. His phone buzzed again, and this time when he looked down, it wasn't a threat. It was Dana. Rourke wants everyone at the station. Now. He's got Langford's arrest warrant in hand, and he wants Haley's statement on record before anything else moves. Caleb found Ryland already limping toward his bike, ribs wrapped tight beneath his jacket, jaw set against the pain. She's not strong enough to be dragged into a police station, Caleb said. She doesn't have to be dragged anywhere, Ryland said. She insisted. Woke up an hour ago, heard what happened at the yard, and told the nurse she wasn't giving anybody permission to leave her out of ending this. That's my daughter for you. They wheeled Haley into Flagstaff PD in a hospital chair, IV pole rattling beside her, a blanket over her cast. And still she sat straighter than half the officers in the room when Rourke set a recorder in front of her. Take your time, Rourke said gently. I don't want to take my time, Haley said, voice hoarse but steady. I want this finished. She gave a full accounting the discrepancies in Hargrove's billing records, the wire transfers she'd found buried in files she was never supposed to access, the man with the Wraith security tattoo who'd caught her at the filing cabinet, the growing unease that had made her decide to run instead of confront it, and the crash that followed less than 48 hours later. Rourke listened without interrupting, occasionally glancing at Dana, who sat off to the side, cross-referencing every detail against the documents already recovered. This lines up, Dana said quietly when Haley finished. Every piece of it lines up with what we pulled from the backpack and the yard. It's enough, Rourke said. More than enough. He looked up at the room Rylan. Dana, Caleb, two other officers who'd been quietly listening from the doorway. I'm executing the warrant on Langford within the hour. I want backup on standby in case Wraith Security decides today's the day they stop hiding behind lawyers. We're coming, Rylan said. Absolutely not, Rourke said flatly. This is police business now. You've done more than your share getting us here. Let us finish it clean, or every defense attorney in the state gets a field day. Arguing a motorcycle club stormed a suspect's office. Rylan's jaw tightened, the old instinct to act clashing visibly with the newer, harder-won understanding that some fights had to be finished by other hands. Fine, he said finally, but you call the second it's done. My daughter's not sleeping easy until that man's in a cell. They didn't have to wait long. 2 hours later, Rourke walked into the hospital waiting room himself, exhaustion and something like grim satisfaction fighting for space on his tired face. Victor Langford is in custody, he said. Didn't even put up a fight. Man practically handed us his laptop the second he realized what we already had. The room exhaled as one. Haley, still propped up in her wheelchair near the nurse's station, closed her eyes and let out a shaking breath that seemed to release something she'd been holding since the moment she first found those records. There's more, Rourke continued. We traced the van from the yard back to Wraith Security's registered fleet. And the financial trail, Dana, you were right. This goes deeper than Langford alone. We found transfers connecting him to a contractor, doing county maintenance work, and he hesitated, glancing at Rylan, a payment history connecting to a lieutenant in our own department's financial crimes division. Somebody's been burying complaints about Hargrove for over a year. A cop, Rylan said flatly. I'm sorry, Rourke said. I wish I could tell you it stopped with the clinic director. It doesn't. Dana was already on her feet, mind visibly racing through implications. That explains the fast-track news story. That explains how Delacroix's fabricated statement got treated as credible so quickly. Somebody inside the department was helping steer this the moment it happened. Internal affairs is already involved, Rourke said. That part's out of my hands now, but I promise you, it's moving. Caleb, standing quietly near the window, felt something settle in his chest that wasn't quite relief, more like the first even breath after holding air too long. So it's over, he said. Rourke's expression flickered. Langford's under arrest. The immediate threat against you and Haley is neutralized. But over, Mr. Dawson. Cases like this don't end with an arrest. They end in a courtroom, and courtrooms have a way of dragging every ugly detail out into the light for months. Then let them drag it, Haley said from her wheelchair, voice quiet but resolute. I want it dragged out. I want every patient whose information got sold to know exactly who did it and why. The following days moved fast and hard, the way a story does once the dam finally breaks. News vans that had once camped outside the hospital, chasing a false narrative about a suspicious biker associate, now camped outside the county courthouse instead, chasing a very different story, one about a corrupt clinic director, a compromised police lieutenant, and a network of stolen patient funds reached further into the county's infrastructure than anyone had initially guessed. Caleb found himself uncomfortably at the center of it. Reporters who had once printed his photo beneath accusatory headlines now wanted quotes, wanted his story, wanted to know what it felt like to go from suspect to whistleblower in the span of 72 hours. He turned most of them away, uneasy with the attention, until Dana finally sat him down in the diner booth that had become their unofficial headquarters. You don't have to talk to any of them, she said. But you should understand something. Right now, the public narrative decides how fast this case moves, how much pressure stays on the DA's office, whether Langford's lawyers manage to drag this out for years or whether it collapses in months. Silence has a cost too. Caleb turned his coffee cup slowly between his hands. I'm not good at being anybody's story. Nobody asked you to be a story, Dana said. Just tell the truth. Plainly, the way you told it to Rourke, the way you told it to me. That's all any of this ever needed from you. He agreed. Eventually, to a single interview, not with the reporters who'd smeared him days earlier, but with a local journalist who'd covered the Hargrove Clinic's community programs for years and clearly cared more about getting it right than getting it first. Caleb sat across from her in the same hospital waiting room where it had all begun. And when she asked him why he'd gone into that burning car, he gave the only answer that had ever felt true. Because somebody was screaming, and I could still hear her, he said. I don't know how anybody stands there and doesn't move once they hear that. I've never understood how a person does that. The interview aired that evening, and within hours, something shifted in the way Flagstaff talked about him. Strangers stopped Caleb on the street not to accuse him, but to shake his hand, to tell him their own daughters, their own grandchildren, could have been Haley. An elderly woman outside the grocery store pressed a $20 bill into his palm before he could refuse it, insisting he use it for something warm to eat. Her eyes wet with an emotion Caleb didn't fully know how to receive. He wasn't used to being seen. It unsettled him more than the threats had. Preliminary hearings began 2 weeks later. Caleb sat in the gallery beside Rylan and Haley, her cast now a lighter, more mobile fiberglass version, her strength visibly returning day by day while Langford's defense attorney, a sharp, expensive-looking man named Pruitt, methodically tried to dismantle the prosecution's foundation. Mr. Dawson, Pruitt said during Caleb's testimony, tone dripping with practiced condescension, you have no formal certification in automotive forensics. Correct? Correct, Caleb said evenly. No degree in mechanical engineering. No professional license of any kind. That's right. In fact, you don't even have a permanent address, do you, Mr. Dawson? A ripple moved through the gallery. Caleb felt the old, familiar heat rise in his chest, the instinct to shrink, to apologize for a circumstance he hadn't chosen, and then, deliberately, he let it pass through him, instead of controlling him. No, he said calmly, I don't. So you'd agree that your assessment of that brake line, the thing this entire prosecution hinges on, comes from a man with no formal training and no fixed home, rather than an accredited expert? I'd agree I don't have a diploma, Caleb said. I've got 15 years of hands under hoods in shops on the side of highways, fixing what other people couldn't afford to have fixed by anybody with a fancy certificate. I know what a worn brake line looks like because I've replaced hundreds of them. I know what a deliberately cut one looks like because I've seen the difference with my own eyes more times than I can count. Not having a house never stopped me from knowing metal, Mr. Pruitt. And it sure didn't stop me from noticing your client's security team burning documents in an abandoned yard the same week I made that assessment. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge rapped her gavel once, more out of formality than actual disorder, but Caleb caught the flicker of something like satisfaction cross Dana's face from the prosecution table. Pruitt tried a different angle. You understand that the state's independent forensic examiner confirmed your amateur assessment only after your claims were already public. Isn't it possible you got lucky? Isn't it possible, Caleb said, that your client's men wouldn't have needed to burn a yard full of evidence if there was nothing there worth hiding? Objection, Pruitt snapped. Withdrawn, Caleb said dryly, and this time even the judge had to hide a small, tired smile behind her hand. The testimony that followed his own painted an increasingly damning picture. The independent forensic examiner confirmed Caleb's assessment down to the precise method of sabotage. Financial analysts walked the jury through years of skimmed patient funds, insurance fraud, and the systematic sale of private medical records to a data broker operating out of state. And then, on the third day, came the testimony none of them had fully prepared for. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, the compromised officer from the department's Financial Crimes Division, took a plea deal in exchange for full cooperation, and his testimony detailed exactly how deep the operation had run. Payments funneled through shell accounts to bury 3 separate prior complaints against Hargrove over the past 2 years. Pressure applied to reporters to run the fabricated Biker Associates story. Within hours of the crash, specifically to discredit Caleb before he could be taken seriously as a witness. Instructions relayed to Wraith security about the location of Haley's records the moment Langford realized she'd found them. Why? The prosecutor asked Webb directly. Why help cover for a man stealing from vulnerable patients? Webb's voice was flat, hollow, a man who'd clearly spent weeks confronting exactly how far he'd fallen. Money at first, then fear, once I understood how much he already had on me if I tried to stop. He glanced once, briefly, toward the gallery, toward Rylan and Haley sitting together, before looking back down at his hands. I told myself it was small. Skimmed funds, nothing anybody would really miss. I never let myself think about what happened when a 22-year-old girl found out, and he decided the easiest fix was making sure she never made it to a courtroom. Haley's hand found her father's, gripping tight, and Rylan wrapped his arm around her shoulders without ever taking his eye off the man whose corruption had nearly cost him everything. The trial ran 3 more weeks. Caleb attended every session he could, sitting quietly in the gallery, watching a system that had initially wanted to arrest him instead slowly, methodically build the case that would put the actual guilty men away. He watched Langford's composed, expensive facade crack a little more each day under the weight of documents he could no longer explain away, until finally on a gray Thursday morning in late autumn, the jury returned guilty on every count. The courtroom erupted the moment the verdict was read, not into chaos, but into something closer to collective release. Months of fear and fury finally finding somewhere to land. Haley buried her face against her father's shoulder, crying openly for the first time since the crash. Dana sat back in her chair at the prosecution table, exhaling like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. And Caleb, sitting near the back of the gallery, felt something unclench in his chest that he hadn't fully realized he'd been carrying. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed immediately, but this time Caleb didn't turn away from them entirely. He stood beside Rylan and Haley on the courthouse steps as Dana addressed the cameras, laying out the scope of what the investigation had ultimately uncovered. Langford sentenced to decades in prison, Wraith Security's operating license revoked, pending further investigation. Lieutenant Webb's cooperation, leading to 2 additional arrests within the department, and every dollar of the recovered stolen funds, ordered, returned to Hargrove's Patient Trust Fund for redistribution to the people who'd actually been harmed. There's one more thing, Dana added, glancing toward Caleb with a small, deliberate smile. None of this happens without a man this city initially tried to arrest instead of thank. Caleb Dawson identified the sabotage that proved this was attempted murder, not an accident. He tracked down a paid witness and got him to tell the truth. He physically intervened when Langford's men tried to destroy the last of the evidence. I've spent 22 years in courtrooms. I don't often get to say this and mean it completely. This case doesn't exist without him. Caleb shifted uncomfortably under the sudden weight of camera flashes and shouted questions. But when one reporter pushed forward and asked what he thought should happen to the crowd of bystanders who'd filmed the crash instead of helping, something in him settled into an answer he'd clearly been carrying for a while. I'm not interested in shaming anybody for freezing, Caleb said. Fear does that to people. It froze plenty of folks that day, and honestly, some part of me understands why. What I'd ask instead is that next time any of us, anywhere, we remember that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about moving anyway, even when you're scared out of your mind. That's the only thing that actually changes what happens next. The words rippled outward further than Caleb ever expected, clipped and replayed across local news, then picked up by wider outlets, hungry for a story about ordinary courage in an era that seemed increasingly starved for it. Caleb found the attention deeply uncomfortable, retreating whenever he could to the quiet of his truck, to Marisol's shelter, to the small, unassuming corners of Flagstaff where nobody looked at him twice. It was there, 3 days after the verdict, that Rylan found him. Figured you'd be hiding somewhere like this, Rylan said, easing himself onto the tailgate of Caleb's truck, ribs still faintly tender beneath his jacket. Not hiding, Caleb said, just breathing. Fair enough. Rylan was quiet for a moment, staring out at the mountains, turning gold under the late afternoon sun. I want to give you something. You don't owe me anything. I didn't say I owed you, Rylan said. I said I want to. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, thick enough that Caleb could guess its contents without opening it. That's not charity. That's a fraction of what my daughter's life is worth to me. And honestly, it's an insult even offering that little. Caleb didn't take it. I can't. Why not? Because the second I take that, this stops being what it was, Caleb said quietly. I didn't pull her out of that car for money. I don't want it to look like I did, not even after the fact. Rylan studied him for a long moment, something like understanding, and maybe a little frustration, crossing his weathered face. Then let me offer something else. A bike. Anyone you want, from the shop, no strings. Or he hesitated, and when he continued, his voice had dropped into something more careful, more significant. A patch. Membership. You'd have brothers and sisters behind you for the rest of your life. Caleb. That's not something most people get offered. For a moment, Caleb genuinely considered it the pull of belonging to something, of finally having people who'd stand behind him the way this club had stood in that hospital parking lot weeks earlier. But something steadier, more grounded, held him back. I appreciate that, Caleb said, meaning it fully. More than I know how to say. But I don't want a new identity, Rylan. I don't want to be given a life. I want the chance to build one. The same way I've been trying to my whole time out here, slow, hard on my own 2 feet. If I take the patch now, take the bike, take the money, I'll always wonder if I earned any of it, or if it just got handed to me because of one afternoon on a flooded highway. Rylan's expression shifted slowly into something that looked almost like pride. You know, he said, most people would have taken every single thing I offered without a second thought. I'm not most people, Caleb said. I'm just the guy who couldn't drive past a screaming voice. Rylan laughed a real laugh, warm and surprised, the first Caleb had heard from him since this entire ordeal began. No, he said, shaking his head. You're a hell of a lot more than that. Son, whether you're ready to hear it yet or not. They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun dropped lower over the mountains. Two men who'd been strangers a month earlier, now bound by something neither of them fully had words for yet. Somewhere behind them, Caleb's phone buzzed one final time that evening, not a threat this time, but a message from Haley. Come by the hospital tomorrow. I've got something I want to talk to you about. Something big. Caleb stared at the message for a long moment, an unfamiliar warmth settling into his chest, the kind he hadn't let himself feel in longer than he could remember. Whatever it was Haley wanted to talk about, for the first time in weeks, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow, instead of simply surviving it. Caleb barely slept that night, turning Haley's message over in his mind, until sunrise finally gave him permission to stop pretending he wasn't awake. Something big. He'd heard those words before, usually right before his whole world tilted sideways, and some old wary part of him half expected to walk into that hospital room and find bad news waiting instead of good. He found her sitting up in bed, hair pulled back, color returned to her face in a way that hadn't been there in weeks. A folder resting in her lap like she'd been guarding it all morning. You look nervous, Haley said, the ghost of a smile tugging at her mouth. I've had a rough month, Caleb said. Forgive me for expecting the worst. This isn't the worst. Haley patted the chair beside her bed, and Caleb sat, watching her open the folder, with hands that trembled slightly, not from weakness this time, but from something closer to excitement. I've been talking to the hospital's patient advocacy office, and to a few of the nurses who worked Hargrove's old cases. There are people out there, Caleb, dozens of them, maybe more, whose medical information got sold, whose insurance got billed for treatments they never received, and half of them don't even know it yet. Dana mentioned the restitution fund, Caleb said. The stolen money getting redistributed. That's part of it. But money doesn't fix everything. Some of these patients need help understanding what was even done to them. Filing new insurance claims. Getting their credit protected. Some of them just need somebody to sit with them and explain what happened without making them feel stupid for trusting a place that betrayed them. Haley's eyes met his, steady and certain in a way that reminded him powerfully of her father. I want to start a program, a real one, with hospital backing, and I want you to help me build it. Caleb blinked. Me? Haley, I fix cars. I don't know the first thing about insurance claims or patient advocacy. You know something more important, Haley said. You know what it's like to be dismissed, to have people look at you and decide, before you've said a single word, exactly how much you're worth listening to. Half these patients are elderly, low income, people the system already treats like they don't matter. They need somebody in the room who understands that feeling from the inside, not just from a textbook. Caleb sat with that for a long moment, something shifting quietly into place inside him. I don't have an office. I don't have a business degree. I don't even have a permanent address. Haley, you know that. I know exactly who you are, Haley said, and I'm asking you anyway. That's the whole point. Before Caleb could formulate an answer, the door swung open and Ryland stepped through, coffee in each hand, pausing when he caught the tail end of the conversation. She talk you into it yet? You knew about this? Caleb asked. Knew about it. Encouraged it. Practically funded the first 6 months myself before she even got the hospital board to sign off. Ryland handed Caleb a coffee and settled into the other chair, wincing slightly at his still healing ribs. You built something out of nothing more than instinct and stubbornness once already. Caleb, watching you track down Delacroix, read that break line, stand up in that courtroom, that's not something you learn in school. That's just who you are. I don't know if I'm ready to be somebody's mentor, or advocate, or whatever this is, Caleb admitted quietly. Nobody's ready, Haley said. I wasn't ready to find those records. You weren't ready to smash through my window with your bare hand. Half the important things in life happen before anybody feels ready for them. Caleb looked between the two of them, father and daughter, both watching him with the same unwavering patience, and felt something in his chest loosen that had been clenched tight for longer than this last month, maybe for years. Okay, he said finally, I'll help however I can. Haley's answering smile lit up the whole room. Building the program took months, not days. And Caleb learned quickly that courtrooms and crash sites, for all their danger, had at least moved fast. This moved slow meetings with hospital administrators who worried about liability, insurance representatives who spoke a language. Caleb had to learn from scratch, patients who arrived scared and left, more often than not, in tears of relief rather than fear. The first woman Caleb sat with was 78 years old, a widow named Eleanor Pruitt, who'd been billed for a physical therapy regimen she'd never once attended. She sat across from him, wringing a tissue into shreds. Certain, somehow, that the confusion was her own fault, that she'd simply forgotten, that her memory was finally failing, the way she'd always feared it would. You didn't forget anything, Mrs. Pruitt, Caleb told her gently. Somebody billed your insurance for services you never got and pocketed the difference. This isn't on you. Not one piece of it. Nobody's ever explained it to me like that, Eleanor said, blinking back tears. Everybody just talks over my head like I'm supposed to already understand all this. I know that feeling, Caleb said. Better than you might think. By the time she left his small office, a converted supply closet, technically, though Haley had insisted on calling it temporary, until the program's funding expanded. Eleanor Pruitt hugged Caleb tight enough to surprise them both, thanking him with a warmth that stayed with him the rest of the day. He carried that same steadiness into every case that followed. A retired mechanic named Walt, embarrassed to admit he hadn't understood a single line of his own insurance statement. A young mother whose newborn's medical records had been sold alongside her own. A shelter regular Caleb recognized from his own hardest years, stunned that anybody in a hospital office was willing to look him in the eye at all. Word spread. Not loudly, not with headlines, but steadily. The way real trust always spreads, one person telling another, one small act of dignity restored at a time. 6 months after the trial ended, Dana called Caleb with news that made his stomach drop before she'd even finished the sentence. Langford's appeal just got denied, she said. Sentence stands. 32 years. Relief hit Caleb harder than he expected. It's really over. The criminal case is, Dana said. Civil suits from patients are just getting started, which is good. That's where a lot of them will actually see compensation. And Caleb, her voice softened slightly, I wanted you to hear this from me before it hits the news. The DA's office wants to formally recognize your role in breaking this case open. There's talk of a citizen's commendation, might even come with a small monetary award from the county. Caleb hesitated. I don't need recognition. I know you don't, Dana said. But other people need to see it. Every person out there who's ever been dismissed because they didn't have the right address or the right resume needs to see that the truth mattered more than any of that in the end. Let them give you the recognition, Caleb. Not for you. For everybody who's ever felt invisible the way this whole city almost made you feel. He thought about Eleanor Pruitt's grateful tears, about Walt's embarrassed relief, about the shelter regular who still couldn't quite believe anybody in a suit would look him in the eye. Caleb exhaled slowly. Okay, he said. For them. The ceremony was small, held in the county courthouse's front steps rather than some grand hall, which suited Caleb far better than anything more elaborate would have. Ryland stood beside him, along with Haley, now walking without any trace of a limp, and Dana, who'd stepped down from active prosecution work to focus entirely on victim advocacy in the aftermath of the case. The county commissioner read a short statement praising Caleb's courage and persistence, handed him a modest plaque and an envelope Caleb later discovered contained far more money than he'd expected, and invited him to say a few words. Caleb stood at the small podium, uncomfortable under the scattered applause and camera flashes, and found himself once again reaching for the only kind of truth he'd ever really known how to offer. A few months ago, he said, I was the guy people crossed the street to avoid. Homeless, no fixed address, exactly the kind of person this whole system usually decides isn't worth listening to. And for about 24 hours after I pulled Haley Maddox out of a burning car, that's exactly how I got treated like a suspect, instead of somebody who just tried to save a life. He paused, scanning the small crowd gathered on the courthouse steps. What changed wasn't me. I was the same person the whole time. What changed was that a few people, Ryland, Dana, Haley, Detective Rourke, decided to actually listen instead of assume. That's it. That's the whole secret. It's not complicated. People just have to choose to look past what somebody's circumstances suggest about them and see what's actually true instead. He found Ryland's eyes in the small crowd, and the older man nodded once, slow and solemn pride written plainly across his weathered face. I'm not special, Caleb continued. I just refuse to walk past somebody who was screaming for help. Any one of you would have done the same if you'd let yourselves. That's really all courage ever is, not being fearless. Just refusing to let fear be the last word. The applause that followed felt different to Caleb than anything before it, not loud, not overwhelming, but steady and warm. The kind that didn't need to announce itself to mean something. Life settled, in the months that followed, into a rhythm Caleb had never quite believed he'd get to have. He rented his first apartment small, above a hardware store downtown, but genuinely his, with a lease and a key, and a door he could lock behind himself at night. He enrolled in a certification program at the community college, finally putting 15 years of hands-on experience towards something official, something nobody could dismiss with a single condescending question in a courtroom ever again. Haley's advocacy program expanded faster than any of them anticipated, moving out of Caleb's converted supply closet into an actual wing of the hospital's outpatient center, with 2 additional staff members hired to help manage the growing caseload. She finished her nursing degree that spring, walking across the graduation stage to applause that included, prominently, an entire section of Hell's Angels members who'd shown up in their full colors, utterly unbothered by the raised eyebrows from other families in attendance. Ryland, for his part, never stopped trying to give Caleb something in return for what he'd done, though the offers grew smaller, more thoughtful, less about grand gestures, and more about the quiet, steady presence of a man who genuinely come to think of Caleb as something like family. Sunday dinners at Ryland's place became a fixture. Caleb found himself looking forward to more than he wanted to admit. Loud, chaotic affairs full of club members swapping stories, Haley rolling her eyes at her father's more embarrassing anecdotes, and Caleb, slowly, unmistakably, learning what it felt like to belong somewhere without having to earn it over and over again. It was at one of those dinners, nearly a year after the crash, that Ryland brought up the idea that would end up reshaping everything once more. "I've been thinking," Ryland said, passing a dish of cornbread down the crowded table, "about that garage on Route 40, the old Kessler place. Been sitting empty going on 3 years now. The one with the collapsed roof on the east side?" Otis asked, mouth full. "That one. Big enough for a full working shop. Land around it, besides." Ryland's eyes found Caleb's from across the table. "I've been talking to some people about buying it. Fixing it up right. Not for the club, for the community. A place where kids who've got nothing, kids like Caleb was, can learn a real trade. Get paid while they learn it. Maybe get some housing assistance built in too, so nobody's sleeping in their truck while they're trying to build something better for themselves." The table went quiet, all eyes shifting toward Caleb, who sat frozen with a fork halfway to his mouth. "You're talking about a training center," Caleb said slowly. "I'm talking about giving people what you never had and built anyway," Ryland said. "Except this time, they won't have to do it entirely alone." "And you want me to run it," Caleb said, already sensing where this was heading. "I want you to teach at it," Ryland corrected. "Not because you owe anybody anything. Because you're the best damn mechanic I've ever seen work a brake line. And because every kid who walks through that door needs to see somebody who climbed out of exactly where they're standing and made something real out of it. That's not a debt, Caleb. That's just good sense." Caleb set his fork down slowly, throat tight in a way he hadn't expected. "I don't know if I'm cut out to teach anybody anything. You taught Eleanor Pruitt how insurance fraud works without making her feel stupid," Haley said from across the table. "You taught a courtroom full of skeptical lawyers what a sabotaged brake line looks like. You've been teaching this whole time, Caleb. You just haven't called it that yet." The purchase closed 3 months later. Renovations took most of the following year, a slow, steady process funded by the club. By community donations that poured in once local news covered the project, and by a portion of Langford's court-ordered restitution that Dana had fought successfully to redirect toward exactly this kind of initiative. Caleb spent nearly every free hour there himself, hands back in familiar territory, rebuilding a collapsed roof with the same steady focus he'd once brought to a shattered SUV window. They named it the Dawson Roadhouse and Training Center, over Caleb's strenuous, repeated objections. "I didn't do this alone," he protested to Ryland the day the sign went up above the main bay doors. "Nobody said you did," Ryland replied, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "But this whole thing started the day you refused to walk past a burning car." Seems fitting the name remembers that. Opening day arrived on a clear autumn morning nearly 2 years after the crash that had started everything. Caleb stood in the main bay, freshly painted, tools organized along the walls with the kind of precision only a lifetime mechanic could appreciate, and watched as the first thunder of engines began rolling up Route 40, hundreds of them. The same overwhelming, beautiful sound that had once terrified him in a hospital parking lot and now filled him with nothing but warmth. Riders poured through the gates in disciplined, joyful formation, filling the lot, filling the new bays, filling the small stage set up near the entrance where a modest banner read simply, "Everyone deserves a chance to rebuild." The first class of trainees stood nervously near the front, a dozen young men and women who'd been referred through shelters, through the hospital's advocacy program, through word of mouth, traveling exactly the way it always had, among the people the rest of the world tended to overlook. Caleb recognized the look on their faces immediately, that particular mixture of hope and disbelief. The look of people who'd been let down too many times to fully trust that this one might actually be real. He understood that look better than anyone standing in that lot. Ryland took the small stage first, keeping his remarks brief, gesturing toward Caleb with visible pride. 2 years ago, A stranger pulled my daughter out of a burning car and asked for nothing in return. Today, that same man is about to give a dozen young people something most of them have never been offered a real chance. I could talk all day about what that means to me as a father. Instead, I'll just say this: watch what happens next. That's the whole speech. Haley spoke next, describing the advocacy program that had grown from Caleb's small supply closet office into something now helping dozens of patients every month, crediting him directly for teaching her that real change usually starts small, with one person choosing to actually listen. Then it was Caleb's turn, and for once, standing in front of a crowd didn't fill him with the old instinct to disappear. I spent a long time, he said, voice carrying clearly across the quiet lot, believing that where you slept at night said something true about who you were, that not having an address meant not having value. I believed that because the world kept telling me so. Over and over, in 100 small ways I stopped even noticing after a while. He paused, scanning the crowd, the riders, the trainees, Rylan and Haley standing together near the front, Dana off to the side, with the small, satisfied smile of somebody who'd helped build exactly the ending she'd hoped for. I was wrong. It took a burning car and a girl I'd never met to prove it to me, but I was wrong. What you've got isn't not just because somebody else can't see the value in it yet. Sometimes it just takes the right moment and the right people for that value to finally show itself. That's what this place is for. Not charity, not pity. Just a fair shot at proving what was true about you the entire time. The applause rolled through the lot like a wave, riders and trainees and community members alike. And somewhere in the middle of it, Haley approached the stage carrying something small wrapped in cloth. She climbed the steps and pressed it into Caleb's hands. "You fixed this for me," she said, "outside intensive care. The night you saved my life. I want you to have it back. Every single day this place is open, I want you to remember exactly why it exists." Caleb unwrapped the cloth to find the necklace he'd repaired that first terrible night, delicate silver catching the afternoon light, and something in his chest tightened with an emotion too full to easily name. Rylan stepped up beside him then, resting a hand on Caleb's shoulder, voice dropping low enough that it felt meant only for the two of them, even surrounded by hundreds of witnesses. "You saved my daughter before you knew a single soul would ever stand behind you," he said. "Before any of us. Before the club. Before the courtroom. Before the recognition. Before any of it. You did it because it was right, and you'd have done it exactly the same way, even if none of this ever happened afterward. That's who you are, Caleb. Not the headlines. Not the plaque. That moment, right there, when nobody else moved and you did." Caleb's throat worked around words that didn't want to come easily. She needed someone he finally managed. That was enough. "That's always been enough," Rylan said. "That's the whole point." The celebration stretched long into the evening, laughter and stories, and the steady rumble of engines gradually giving way to quieter conversation as the sun dropped behind the mountains. Caleb moved through the crowd, shaking hands, answering questions from nervous new trainees, watching Eleanor Pruitt, who'd insisted on attending despite her age, leaning on her son's arm beam, with pride as though she'd personally built the place herself. Long after most of the crowd had finally dispersed, Caleb found himself alone in the main bay, the day's celebration reduced to distant laughter drifting in from outside, the tools along the walls catching the last amber light of evening. He ran a hand along the workbench, still smelling faintly of fresh paint and machine oil, and allowed himself, for the first time in longer than he could remember, to simply feel proud of something without immediately looking for the catch, the reason it might still slip away. His old pickup truck sat parked just outside the main doors, exactly where it always did, dented and weathered and entirely unchanged by everything that had happened around it. Caleb glanced out at it through the open bay door and felt no shame in its presence at all, not anymore. It wasn't a symbol of everything he'd escaped. It was proof of everything he'd carried with him, unbroken, through every single mile of the hardest road he'd ever traveled, straight through to this exact moment. He locked up the shop as the last light faded from the sky, keys jingling in his hand, the necklace Haley had returned to him, tucked safely in his jacket pocket. Tomorrow, a dozen young people would walk through those doors for their first real lesson. And Caleb intended to teach them everything he knew, not just about engines and brake lines and the honest, patient work of fixing what was broken, but about the simple, unshakable truth that had carried him from a flooded highway to this very spot. A person's circumstances never reveal their true worth. Only their choices do. And on that quiet, hard-won evening, standing in a shop built from nothing but stubbornness, courage, and a stranger's refusal to walk away, Caleb Dawson understood completely, and for the first time in his life, exactly who he was and exactly what he had built would carry on long after he was gone, one rescued life at a time, forever.